synthesis is becoming an imperative, and we have more information to synthesize than ever before, and some of that information is terrific. But knowing how to sift out what's good and what's not good, and how to put it together, is going to be a tremendous challenge for people of every age. When web evolved to Web 2.0, which is the web where you can create, you can post your own videos on YouTube, you can create your own world in Second Life, and of course you can blog, etc., etc. The opportunities for inventing are unprecedented. But all of us who are observing this, including Jaron Lanier, who's just written a book on the topic, are not at all sure that Web 2.0 will encourage big C, capital creativity, or just little tweaks on all the stuff that's already there. We just don't know. It could usher in a renaissance of creativity, but it might not. That's just an unknown. For respect and ethics, as I've already mentioned, it's no longer just the people on the block, and it's no longer just everybody doing the same thing. It's how do we treat with respect and ethically people from all over the world with whom we have primarily or exclusively a digital relationship. And our major research now is on this topic. I will simply say in a sentence, we're looking at what's happening in the digital world, which is a wild west now. It's completely unregulated, except if you live in China. My apologies if you live in China. In Hong Kong now. It's a completely unregulated world. What will happen to senses of identity, privacy, ownership and authorship of intellectual property, trustworthiness and credibility? I don't trust Wikipedia ever alone, though I look at it all the time. And why should people trust us in the digital world? And then the fifth thing, which is the key to everything, is participation in the community. Because once you enter the digital world and create a footprint, you can never know for sure that it has been erased. Unless, of course, it's Karl Rove's messages, which are not accessible. We'll explain that later. And this is amazing because, of course, kids now of any age, every child lies together on Facebook. We've already established that. So kids of any age can be in the digital world and create all sorts of things, and that can come to haunt them. So when it comes to media, I think we're living in an age which is as epochal as the invention of print 500 years ago or the invention of writing thousands of years ago. The difference is, when writing was invented, or when print was invented, it took hundreds of years to see the consequences. With the digital world, it's happening with warp speed. And that is really, for me, very mind-boggling. What's our role as educators in nurturing these minds? First of all, if you've never thought about these before, if you've never thought about synthesizing, or why certain parts of the world have been more oriented toward creativity, or the difference between respect, which goes back to the Bible, and ethics, which involves complex, differentiated society, I hope that you will consider that to be useful. I think one of the things social science does is to give us new categories. Of course, the best thing is that we can model for our own students positive instantiations of respect, synthesizing, and so on. But we can't all do all of them. So examples from history or from current events. I mentioned Obama because even if you don't like him, you realize he tries very hard to be a respectful human being. And one thing which we've learned from our research, positive examples are not enough. young people need to understand the negative examples, what I call the no cigar. Because often things like plagiarism, young people see nothing wrong with that. And you can't just say, well, it's wrong, and we're going to punish you. You have to have them understand why it's not fair to themselves, or to the author, or to other people to do it. And that's not one of these things you can get out of your personal assistant. That's something that has to be worked out over a period of time. Even if you like all five of these minds, and even if you're waving the flag, ultimately all of us, for ourselves, have to perform a personal synthesis. And that's because the five minds don't fit together as neatly as a jigsaw. Respect and ethics can be in conflict. You should respect your associates and your supervisor. But let's say that person is behaving unethical. What do? That pits respect against ethics. Discipline and creativity can also be in conflict, because being an expert is very different than overthrowing the orthodoxy. So ultimately, each of us and each of the students with whom we work have to figure out what's the best blend, what's their way of putting together the pieces of the puzzle so they have an integrated human being. Finally, I'm not a teacher of language. You all are in one way or another. And so most of the application of my ideas are really going to be up to you. But I did take some time to offer 5 suggestions. Number 1, you should keep in mind not the world where you grew up in, but the world in which your young people will be living. And that's a world that's global, tremendously connected. Learning continues throughout life, so learning how to learn is at least as important as doing well in the test. Since many of you are working with people from other countries, either in the other country or in the country where they've moved, think about the 5 minds in the countries of origin. What's the notion about creativity, or about synthesizing, or about respect in the countries of origin? I'm just thinking about what happened when President Bollinger of Columbia University invited President Ahmadinejad of Iran to speak a year or 2 ago. And President Bollinger, whom I don't know, and whom I basically respect, introduced about Ahmadinejad by dissing him. And that wasn't probably appropriate here, but it sure as hell wasn't appropriate for the society that Ahmadinejad came from. And not knowing about those different assumptions can be very, very tricky. You should know about them yourselves, but the web can be a fantastic source of information, including video information or other media information about different conceptions of the minds elsewhere. And I can't, unfortunately, read most of the languages in which my book will, I hope, be translated, but it'll be interesting to see what kind of cultural surround accompanies these 5 labels. And finally, as I said earlier, don't just assume that the reasons for these things are self-evident. Try to explain what's genuine creativity and what's not, what's pseudo-respect and what's real respect, and so on. So this slide says summary on one leg. I don't have an elevator summary, but as a teacher, I will remind you for a minute or 2 about what we've done for the last 45 minutes or so. Began by saying this is not about multiple intelligences, and it wasn't. It's about policy.